Good day to everyone. We're about to start this webinar on recapping the Australian utility scale solar market and on O&M best practices for optimum performance. I would like to welcome everyone that's joining us today from different parts in the world. Good afternoon to our attendees in Australia, and an early good morning to our attendees in Europe, of which I'm part of. We're hosting this webinar from Solarplaza in cooperation with Smart Energy Council. And I would like to introduce you later to our speakers, Tristan Edis and Simon Chau, which are also on the line. So, short recap of the agenda for today. First, a short introduction by me. My name is Lisette Buist. I'm a project manager at Solarplaza, and I will give you a short background on what Solarplaza does and also why we're organizing this webinar today. After that, we'll go into an Australian solar market update focused on utility scale solar by Tristan Edis. He's Director of Analysis and Advisory in Green Energy Markets and one of the experts on the Australian market status. So we're very happy that he will join us today and share with us key market statistics and an outlook for solar in the years to come. Then we'll continue with a view on O&M, operations and maintenance challenges in utility scale solar. For this, we have Simon Chau on board. He's working with Canadian Solar, and he will share with us key challenges that we see in the Australian O&M space, and also learnings from Canadian Solar's experience in other countries. Of course, we'll give you the opportunity to ask all your pressing questions on this topic. So we're happy to host a Q&A after these two presentations to answer your questions. And then we'll end the webinar in approximately 1 hour from now. So first, briefly touching upon what Solarplaza does, for those of you who don't know us, we're based in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and our mission is to positively impact the world by accelerating the sustainable energy transition. 60,000 PV professionals around the world, and we host a lot of information on our online platform, and we organize conferences and events in the space of solar asset management optimization. Of which we have a broad experience with multiple companies. These are some of our global partners that have joined us around the world. And you see here, of course, also Canadian Solar is with us today. And we're happy to also see that many of these partners are active in Australia and that they actually also urged us to join us to Australia. And that's why we're hosting our inaugural edition of the Solar Asset Management Conference in Australia in June. It will take place on the 26th and 27th of June. And we're organizing this in cooperation with our partner, Smart Energy Council, who we're also hosting this webinar with today. Smart Energy Council is the peak industry body for smart energy storage and solar in Australia. So we're very happy to partner up with them and combine our knowledge on this one. For those of you who don't know solar asset management conferences, we've been organizing them in multiple countries around the world, some of them already in 6th or 7th edition. It's the leading global conference focused on the operational phase of solar plants and portfolios. So we take a look at what comes after basically the development phase in the longer term lifetime of a solar plant. How do you optimize performance, and how do you make sure you get an adequate return on that? What will happen in Australia in June is we'll have over 150 attendees and high-level decision makers, 30 experts covering a very detailed program on this topic in 2 days. So in order to be well prepared and geared up for this conference, we're hosting this webinar today to give you a bit of background on the state of Australian solar and the O&M space. We'll go more in depth on that in the conference. So some practical notes before we go to the actual content. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat box that you find in your GoToWebinar pop-up. I have technical support here that can help you if there's any technical issues, so you can raise it there. Then we have, of course, the option to send in all your questions for the Q&A. You can use the question box for that. We will collect all the questions and we'll ask most of them, hopefully, at the end of this presentation. Then also important to notice is that the recordings and slides of this webinar will be provided by email afterwards to all registered attendees. So you also have a look, be able to have a look at this after today's webinar. So now I'm very excited to actually go into the topic of today. We're very happy to have these two experts on board. So I'm going to introduce you to Tristan Edis, the Director of Analysis and Advisory at Green Energy Markets. Tristan has over 13 years of experience in analyzing energy and climate change policy issues and the markets that are associated with that. So he has a very high level of knowledge to present us with the Australian market update today. He can also be seen as one of Australia's most prominent expert commentators on these topics. So we are very curious to hear what he has to say today about where we're heading with the Australian solar market space. So I'm now handing over the floor to Tristan. Tristan, you can take it away from here. Good luck and enjoy.
Thanks, Lizette. Welcome all to this webinar. Look, a little bit about green energy markets before I plough on to our presentation. So green energy markets is a market analysis and advisory firm focused on the clean energy sector in Australia, and we make available, we have a number of reports available on a subscription basis, and a large number of the companies that have been involved in projects that have proceeded to construction in the last 2 years. I think probably pretty much almost every single one would count either the financier, the developer, or the off-taker as one of our subscribers. So I'm going to cover off on the market outlook for utility scale solar here in Australia. Now, the presentation will cover off on what's been happening in the last few years, which has been basically a boom by Australian standards in investment, and look at why that has occurred, the reason why this boom is unlikely to persist without new government policy, and then the outlook for new government policy. So moving on, in terms of what's happened at the utility scale level, we went through quite what you might call a dark period for renewable energy in Australia around the 2013-2014, and a large chunk of the 2015 period due to the election of a government led by Tony Abbott, who at the time was, you would have to say, extremely hostile to the renewable energy sector. And then after that drought, we got some certainty from both the government and the main opposition party re-legislated the renewable energy target, and we then really saw investment take off, and that really didn't happen until the last quarter of 2016. And then since then, we've seen 4,700 megawatts of solar, 5,400 megawatts of wind committed to construction. And in addition, we have about 12,000 megawatts of solar and 436 megawatts of wind that are under a power purchase agreement but have not yet been committed to construction. And the graph there gives you the timeline over which that's occurred. Now, layered on top of that very large amount of capacity that's coming into the market at a large scale level, we also have quite a buoyant rooftop solar sector. And so this chart here is the historical installations of solar PV below 100 kilowatts in system size. And what we anticipate in 2019 is about 1,927 megawatts of sub 100 kilowatt solar will be installed, and then 1,600 meg in 2020 and close to that in 2021. So that's a lot of solar capacity that's going to be coming into the electricity market within a very short period of time, on top of also quite a significant amount of wind. Now, why have we seen this influx of investment? There are two simple reasons for that. One is around the back end of 2016, we saw a dramatic escalation in electricity wholesale power prices. And what I've shown on that chart are the forward contracts, baseload contracts for all the main states in the national electricity market. And this is tracing over the 3rd of May 2016 to the 2nd of May 2017. And you can see that large rise, which was largely driven by the closure of a large coal-fired generator called Hazelwood. Now, the other side to this boom was, this is a chart of what is known as the LGC, which is a renewable energy certificate, which is generated on a per megawatt hour basis. So for every megawatt hour of electricity a renewable energy generator produces, they earn a single LGC. And this is the spot price since 2003 for LGCs. And what we see is in that same similar time period, the back end of 2015, early 2016, we saw them absolutely skyrocket in price to reach a pinnacle very close to $90 per LGC, which is essentially a top-up revenue of $90 per megawatt hour on top of the wholesale electricity price, which was getting towards $90 as well. So you were getting $180 a megawatt hour for your electricity, which I think no matter where you live is a lot of money for an electricity project. And so that helps explain why there was such a large boom in investment. And the counter side to that, and this is why I'm moving into why this boom is potentially going to turn into a bust, is we can see that the price of LGCs went down as quickly as they have gone up. So recent trades have been in the realm of $36 per LGC, so they absolutely plummeted in price. Now, Lizette, one of the things we were going to cover off on was some questions for you guys in the audience. It would be helpful to know what your roles are within the supply chain and some of the factors that are driving your interest in this area. So are we able to do that poll, Lizette? Okay, we've got that there. So if you guys can fill that out, that'll help me understand a little bit more about your background that I can help to inform this talk. So one of them is how you would classify your core business. And the other one that would be, can we do the other one, Lizette? Is that possible as well?
We'll first have a look at the results of this poll, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Okay.
We can see the results on the screen right now.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we've got a mixture there. That's probably about, I think I'm delivering it at the right audience then in terms of the nature of the presentation. It's about prospects going forward and what's going on. So that's very helpful to understand where you guys are all involved. So the other one, I suppose, is understanding what your top of mind concerns are for future investment in large-scale solar, and what's concerning you guys. So I'll just wait while you fill that out.
What are your expectations on this, Tristan? What do you feel is a very pressing concern?
Oh, look, grid connection is an absolutely huge issue. I'm just at a wind industry conference actually at the moment, and I'd have to say that one is very much top of mind. But securing PPAs is also incredibly important for developers, underpinning their revenue and then therefore their financing. So I think really they're the two, but certainly people would prize a few network engineers. They seem to be in rare demand. They seem to be rare to hold off. There we go. So grid connection stability is nearly the biggest issue confronting people, and we'll sort of touch on that topic as well as we go through this presentation. So I'll just move on to the next slide. Okay, so we can see there a plummeting in the LGC price, and if we looked at the futures market, we'll see they're trading in the 2023 futures market for $5. So there's further falls to come in the LGC price. So if we move to electricity prices, this is just a table that I put together. It was a few months ago, so it'll be a little bit out of date. And what I've done there is looked at what the breakdown is of electricity generation by fuel type in 2017, 2018, and then taken into account all the projects that are currently committed to construction or have a PPA, as well as forecast of expected rooftop solar uptake. And I would point out that in this table, this is AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator's forecast of rooftop solar. Our view is that actually rooftop solar will be bigger than what they were forecasting. But the key point here in this particular table is the reduction at the bottom line required from coal and gas to accommodate all this extra supply from renewable energy. And by 2020, we've got to see shift aside a displacement of 26,000 megawatt hours, million megawatt hours, so 26,417 gigawatt hours of coal and gas. Now, to put that in perspective for the national electricity market, the entire gas production was 20,000 gigawatt hours. And we're really talking 2 to 3 significant coal generators need to entirely shut down to make way for that kind of amount of extra generation. And then if we look at 2025, the closure of Liddell, which is this change, this minus 8.5 million megawatt hours, you still have a displacement of nearly 20,000 gigawatt hours from other fossil fuel generators to make way for all the extra renewables that's coming through. So that is going to have a consequence on wholesale pool prices. So at the moment, they've stayed high so far this year, and the forward market says they're going to stay relatively high. But I think the key thing people need to keep in mind is that is a huge amount of generation coming into the market relative to its overall size, and that is going to have a significant impact. So what I've done here in these little charts is tried to model what would happen to the supply mix on an average day by time of day in Queensland as a result of just the extra solar, not the extra wind, just the extra solar. And what we see is by 2020-21, all that extra solar that's coming in has, essentially, if we assume that gas gets displaced first, it's by 2020-2021, it's bitten into all of the gas, and it's also biting into a significant chunk of the coal. And by 2025-26, it's displacing about 2,000 megawatts of coal on top of all of the gas. And compare that to 2017, basically throughout the entire duration of the day, gas is having a role in setting the price. Whereas by 2025, when solar is generating, it's coal on coal competition, which is going to be the marginal price setter. Now, why is that important? Well, the reason for that is the operating cost of coal plant in the national electricity market is very, very low. Now, these are the operating costs. So this is the fuel cost plus the short run marginal operating cost for each of the major black coal and brown coal generators in the NEM, based upon estimates within the Australian Energy Market Operator's integrated system plan. Now, a number of people tell me these are way too low and they're not accurate, and in fact their costs are far higher. That may be true, but even if I injected a substantially higher export parity price for black coal, I still end up with an operating cost somewhere around $35 to maybe $40. And that is substantially below what I am told is the required 10-year PPA price for a good wind or solar project. So what we're seeing as a result of all of this uptake of solar is it would, if coal is competing against coal, then they're going to be essentially operating on their short-run marginal cost, and that's a price that's somewhere in the realm of certainly below $40 somewhere, could be as low as 30, and that's the price we saw in the market around 2015 before the closure of the Hazelwood Power Station and also the Northern Power Station, when we had a much larger oversupply of generation, and also before a spike in the gas price that was driven by LNG. So we do have a precedent for those kinds of prices in the not so distant past. So if we looked at actual contract prices, so the red line is the Queensland baseload contract price for 2021 that end customers are paying, large end customers. And the green line is what a Victorian baseload contract is changing hands for in 2021, about $75. And then overlaid on top of that is the underlying base cost for a Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, Tasmania, Victorian wind and solar project. And then layered on top of that is an estimate by WinLab of the firming requirement. So if you was a renewable generator wanted to go out and offer something like a firmed up baseload contract to an end consumer, this is what they are estimating would be the kind of costs that you would need to charge in these various different bar charts. And what we can see is they generally lie above the cost to an end consumer to get a contract off the ASX forward market. So that also is not a positive story going forward. Moving on, the other constraint that we need to be thinking about is transmission. And what I've done here is I've just chosen a sample, which is a series of northern Queensland projects, solar farms. And what we see there is I've put the original loss factor, transmission loss factor, when those projects originally were going to connect to the grid. And then I've put the most recent proposed draft loss factor for each of those solar farms that was recently published by AEMO. And what we can see there is very large reductions in their loss factor. So what that essentially means is, so if we took Barcaldine, the top solar farm as an example, for every megawatt hour that Barcaldine generates, they are only able to recover from the market 0.8678 of a megawatt hour, because the rest is lost in transmission losses. And so what we're seeing there is these solar farms in these regions are going to see a very large proportion of their generation lost through transmission losses, and it's essentially lost power. So they're very big changes in their loss factors, which reflect the fact that the network, essentially the amount of demand in that area of the network is far below the amount of generation, and transporting it south ends up resulting in significant losses. So that's going to be a significant impact on the economics of any future project that might want to connect in those areas. If we then push forward, this is just taken out of the AEMO integrated system plan, just some quotes from that about that northern Queensland region. So I'm just choosing this as a sample. What we can see is in that little chart, as you add additional generation to that area, you see a huge change in their MLF, which is their transmission loss factor. So really, you'd be mad if you wanted to connect more generation into that area without significant transmission upgrades. And AEMO is essentially saying they don't think it's sensible to upgrade the transmission line there, because there are such large losses associated with the electrical distance between northern Queensland and major load centres, until we see a significant coal closure. Then I've choosing a different area of the network in Western New South Wales and Northwest Victoria. We see some similar constraints occurring. So One example is the Silverton Wind Farm's an absolute shocker, where they have a constraint applying to that 200 megawatt wind farm that they cannot exceed 45 megawatts of output if the Broken Hill solar farm is generating at the same time, or 76 megawatts otherwise. So that is a huge curtailment of that wind farm in that area. I've then shown in that bottom left-hand map the red dots in, excuse me, the red dots indicate areas where AEMO believes there is poor system strength, and typically to resolve that issue, a new project needs to install a synchronous condenser, and that can come, now that $20 million may not be quite the right number, but it is a significant additional cost, and also there's a quite long lead times to obtain those synchronous condensers last time I was told. So, and there is not a significant upgrade of the Northwest Victorian transmission system proposed to be built until 2025 to resolve those sorts of issues. So we're seeing some significant constraints in that area as well. Okay, so I've given you the bad news. Now I'm going to move on to, I suppose that the point of that is that there are some people out there that suggest, oh, well, you know, solar, wind, they've become so cheap that they can compete against fossil fuels, and we don't need any extra ongoing government policy to drive decarbonisation in the system or any kind of revenue top up over and above the electricity price. And what I suppose I was suggesting to you is I would suspect that that may not be right. And so it is important that we see some new government policy put in place. Now, Victoria and Queensland both have ambitious targets to grow renewable energy in those states, but to date, while they have put in place some mechanisms to support development of renewable energy, they are yet to lay out further policies that will deliver additional capacity necessary to achieve their targets. So you have to take their targets with a grain of salt until they put in place some kind of financial mechanism to drive extra deployment. And Queensland in particular, I think, is a bit of a worry because they announced a 400 megawatt reverse auction to provide contracts for difference for projects, and that was announced well over 12 months ago, and we have heard no progress on that, and that is a real worry. The New South Wales election, which is going to be held this Saturday, Labor has a huge program where they're talking about 6 gigawatts supported through reverse auctions, providing long-term offtake contracts. I mean, that is absolutely humongous if they were elected and followed through, plus 1 gigawatt via a government-owned energy company. Coalition haven't really announced anything concrete, although I would say that they are certainly keen to attract investment and certainly have so far, at least in their rhetoric, have been very positive about renewable energy, unlike some of their federal counterparts. In a federal election, which is due in May, Labor has a 45% economy-wide emission reduction target by 2030 that would be delivered via a mixture of a carbon credit trading mechanisms, including what's called the National Energy Guarantee, and another mechanism which would apply outside the electricity sector called the Safeguard Mechanism. To achieve that particular target would require a very, very large expansion of renewable energy. And then on top of that, they've also announced $5 billion in funding for transmission, which, if they spend it the right way, could go a very long way to resolving some of our transmission constraints. The coalition, though, on the other hand, has a far less ambitious emission reduction target, and they maintain that they will achieve this target without any significant new policies. Some people would suggest that that's not right, but that's what they're saying. And their $2 billion, they provided a $2 billion funding boost to what they call the Emission Reduction Fund, And my view is that will not support much, if any, additional renewable energy capacity. So to sum all this up, my view is that further ongoing investment hinges on new government policy, and to a large degree hinges very much on the forthcoming federal election. Some other people would say, no, look, I think there's a number of coal plants that will not be able to hang on and will close, and therefore electricity prices will not decline to those very low levels that I'd outlined as the operating cost of coal. They will be set more by the cost of gas, and therefore, you know, you would see an ongoing buoyant market for renewable energy. Now that may be true, but at the moment, the operators of the existing coal plant, I think the earliest closure after Liddell that we can lock in is Origin Energy have said they would close Eraring in 2032. So that's a long time to wait. Some other coal plant, they may be vulnerable and may potentially withdraw from the market. Vales Point is often used as an example, and Gladstone, which are both quite old plant, but their owners haven't as yet provided any indication that they intend to close those plants. So I might leave it there. I think I've probably exceeded my time allocation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tristan, for that very insightful presentation. Really interesting to hear your expectations also in terms of pricing, and to hear also and see that the poll results on grid connection and transmission requirements and these kind of topics are actually really pressing in Australia. So I'm sure we'll have some more questions about that in the Q&A later. Thanks a lot. We'll continue then to our next speaker, because coming from this large portfolio of solar assets that are in development and that are active in Australia, it's also important to look then at the longer lifetime of these assets and the things that come into play once they're up and running, connected to the grid, and hopefully not curtailed too much. So that's why we have invited also Simon Chau from Canadian Solar. He's our next speaker. He's Operation and Maintenance Sales Manager at Canadian Solar, and he's responsible for developing commercial relationships throughout Australia to expand the Canadian Solar O&M portfolio there. He has over 10 years experience in the solar industry. In various roles, also in various other global companies like Edison and Flextronics. So I'm very happy to give the floor to Simon. And before I do that, I would like to remind the audience that you have the possibility to raise questions throughout the entire presentation in the question box in the pop-up. So please do so, and we'll address your questions afterwards. Simon, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Lisette, and thank you, Tristan, for a most informative presentation. Somewhat sobering, some of the comments made there, but certainly it's thought-provoking. I'll just go into a little bit about what Canadian Solar is doing and where we sit in the market. I'll just bring up the first slide. Am I?
Yeah, I think you have control. Great, thank you.
Sorry about the wait. So Canadian Solar, I guess most of you would know that as a module manufacturer, it's one of the largest module manufacturers globally. But we also do a number of other services and solutions as value adds to module manufacturing. Canadian Solar started around 2010 doing O&M operations in Canada for a number of plants there, and since then has grown to around 800 megawatts under operation and 1.8 gigawatt contracted worldwide. In Australia, it's a fairly new industry in terms of O&M for utility scale, and we currently have around 130 under operation and 660 contracted. But that is growing quite quickly, as I think you saw from the previous slides. There has been some major utility construction over the last 2 years and continues to be so. Globally, there's around 60 plants, and we're quite experienced in a number of different inverter technologies. I should mention that we're also technology agnostic with panels as well. So O&M doesn't necessarily have to be for Canadian Solar. Poll question. Lisette, do you want to? Yep.
Yes, coming up.
So just to understand a little bit about the interest that you may have in this presentation, or what I should be talking about. My presentation is more general. I don't have as many concrete facts and figures as Tristan did, but certainly in this very immature market for O&M, I'm happy to sort of discuss what I can from our perspective and where we see the market going. Okay, so it's a fair mix. I guess the bottom one is scheduled preventative or reactive preventative. Now, this is just a sort of trending comment or question that's coming up a little bit now, is how do we monitor and how best do we provide reactive maintenance? And I guess data analysis is becoming a lot more real-time, more accurate, and we're actually able to assess and use that data much more efficiently now. The technology has improved. You know, there is areas where a scheduled maintenance routine may not actually be that cost effective if you have on-site soil testing that allows you to, for example, actually get much more accurate readings on soil test and performances on the modules. To schedule a reactive module wash as opposed to a scheduled wash certainly would save and improve efficiency. So thank you for asking that question, or focusing on that. So we'll go to the next slide. So key challenges related to the environment. I'll just bring this back a little to, this is sort of basic quick fact check, and what I've done is I've just found some land mass examples to show you the land mass that we're talking about in Australia, and for those locals that understand that, you know, we are a big country. For internationals, the top two little diagrams show an overlay of Australia across the United States of America, and the other one being Europe. To put this into context, Tristan was talking about MLF, marginal loss factor, and transmission losses. We have 850,000 kilometres of distribution lines across Australia, and that's quite large. In fact, on the NEM, the East Coast, we're talking about one of the longest interconnected electricity markets in the world. You know, this has challenges, particularly for Australia as a small population of 25 million. It's not easy to service that landmass. Bring up the next slide. So I guess the acceleration in growth has really occurred in the last few years, and Tristan pointed out the pricing mechanisms that were in place, and the investment boom was pretty much around the pricing that came through, and the LGC pricing as well. So in the last 2 years, we've had huge exponential growth, and currently, my understanding is around 1,900 megawatts of solar farms under construction, and potentially 35 gigawatt in various stages of development. That's to be seen, of course, particularly with the constraints that are now in place through AMO. One of the interesting challenges that we've had on some of the sites that we're dealing with is wildlife. In Australia, we have some of the most venomous snakes and spiders in the world. And of course, their natural habitat is somewhere like a little combiner box, or any sort of area where they can safely hide away. And There's been a couple of surprises to some of the field techs, finding brown snakes and the like perched in some of the actual equipment. In one case, we had a endangered species. It was actually on the farm during construction, which we had to manage as a with local council and environmental protection around setting up processes and systems to relocate within the farm these lizards. So that happened, but that's just I guess a point of what we've seen and experienced in Australia. Added to that, the climate, you know, it is challenging. I guess summing up that, response times, logistics and managing resources. Here's a map from Sunwiz just showing the location of some of the major farms that have been installed or under construction in Australia. To put scale to this, I think Tristan mentioned North Queensland. You know, distances between some of the sites is 400 kilometres. And to actually find resources to manage these farms, from field techs to O&M, you know, engineers, is very challenging. So I guess one of the best ways to address this is to have community engagement and look towards what infrastructures and resources are there locally. And that's certainly one of the larger, or one of the most significant challenges with dealing with farms in Australia. Utility scale farms in general are not located in where the population is. They may be more inland than anything else. Still continuing on this topic, so I guess what we see is that it brings opportunity, being such a young market, and really looking to focus on international experience and how to manage a plant to its most efficient capacity. The risks attached to any sort of solar farm is one that is quite, it doesn't really change except the logistics and environment that they're attached to. So I guess what we see is that in order to provide any sort of service in this space, you need to have a strong organisation with resources, structure, key knowledge of local markets, regulatory bodies, and communicate to the stakeholders. And we've been fortunate enough in the last 12 months to grow our business significantly in Australia to the point that we're looking for more staff, by the way. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say that, Lisette, but I'll put that in there anyway, so feel free to hit me up afterwards. So bringing into the next topic, learnings from O&M in other countries. Our 10 years in the market is global, so we've seen significant challenges in many different markets, but I guess what we have discovered in that period is that being technology agnostic and really keeping up abreast of what technologies are being introduced. Obviously Canadian Solar has had a large input into bifacial, and we're now seeing that as the next O&M challenge for us in terms of how to address the cleaning, simple things like cleaning of bifacial modules. You've got two sites to clean now. How do you manage that? The other thing, of course, is the efficiencies in analysis of data and performance. So we see that with drone thermal imaging. You know, it's now much easier to identify hotspots and look to see the key matrix around what's not performing, what is. So it's embracing these technologies and continually improving your processes. Again, it's just, I guess, to maintain a competitive edge or to develop and introduce and have asset managers continually look to you these are the sort of leading edge areas you need to focus on. And of course, to wrap it all up, you need a nerve center, and we do that quite well with our data monitoring center in Guelph. Okay, so key watch points for O&M excellence. So the learnings that we've had, and I guess these things are continually changing in some ways. The analysis of data and actually availability guarantees is critical for us. So one of the things that we obviously look towards is how do you achieve availability guarantees? What do you need to do to ensure that you'll meet those availability guarantees? And I guess from our perspective, reliability is a critical one. Having those processes in place and actually knowing the limitations of a site. So once you're familiar with the site and any issues that you may have, that's how you sort of form the base for your availability guarantee. We're continually looking to optimize. I think one of the areas that is important is the life cycle of a plant potentially is 25 to 30 years. In that period, you know, the generation of energy will have, whether it's PPA or merchant agreements attached to it, they have considerable financial implications on how to manage those. And from our point of view, we communicate with the stakeholders and we ensure that, you know, optimization is critical in terms of introducing new technologies, data analysis, module washing, vegetation management, any number of areas where you think there's an opportunity to improve the actual plant is critical to how you manage it. From an Australian perspective, what we do see is the climate is quite, it's never cold. We don't have snow here in any of the plants that are based in these areas, particularly in North Queensland, but what you do have is soil reactivity, where you can actually have mud, cracks, huge holes in the ground, movement, rainfall that could be 100 millimeters in 24 hours. Again, it's the environment that impacts the efficiencies and how you perform your O&M. But again, as a key watch point, globally, every environment is different. How you manage those environments is critical to you maintaining optimum O&M performance. My last slide is really just showing the value of O&M in the context of life cycle. And I guess there's a few asset managers here who may be listening. What we see as being the offer that an asset manager should be looking at is this relationship that you intend to have with an O&M provider for perhaps 25 years. Your development period, construction and repower, insignificant in terms of long term. So, you know, choosing the right O&M provider is a critical decision. And what that does is it potentially mitigates any risks or reduces the risks, improves levelized cost of electricity. You know, an example would be the scheduled maintenance around module washing. If you could reduce the cost but maintain the efficiency, why wouldn't you? Improve power purchase agreement prices. What does happen, I guess, for someone like us, and I use an example of us, is that by offering O&M attached to the modules, you do end up in a position where there's some credibility attached to the performance of the modules, and we're able to support our warranties and offer some realistic outputs on those modules. Positive impact return on investment. Again, they're just critical points when you look to choose the right O&M provider. I think that sums up. So mine was a little briefer than Tristan's and a little bit more general, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may or may not have. Yeah, back to you, Lisette.
Thank you, Simon. Very nice to see from your experience in O&M that environments do differ, especially the example with the lizard and the flora and fauna, I think is nicely really summarizing it for Australia. So thanks for sharing your story. We did get quite some questions in already. So what we'll do now in the remaining time of this webinar, around 10 minutes, we'll raise these questions with both of you, Tristan and Simon. So let's have a look at the list here. Maybe we can start with the first part where we looked into the markets, because we talked quite a lot about MLF losses there, and I see that that triggered quite some questions. Of course, it's one of the bigger concerns. So maybe Tristan, if you can answer this one. We see that MLF losses are largely related to distance. And so this is a more technical question. Can changing MLF calculations make a difference as they're related to distance ohms per kilometers? So even new power lines that are 300 kilometers plus are going to have quite low MLFs, aren't they? Is this the case? And can changing then our calculations of these loss factors make a difference to the outcome?
So, I mean, the MLF is a function of the transmission loss on the line, which is a function of the resistance on that line. So, yeah, lines that are built like a higher voltage line, so it will generally have, you know, as a general rule, will have lower losses. So, and a line that is built to transport very large amounts of electricity over it. So we're talking, say, a core transmission line of 500 kV. If you built one of those where you currently have say a project that's connected to 25 kV line, and then you build a 500 kV one down it that's built to handle 500 megawatts instead of 100, you're going to get less losses. So it's a function of the physics of the transmission line that is servicing that particular power plant. The other factor, though, that's important is changes with electricity demand nearby. So if you have a let's say one good example might be a large industrial facility could start up in Townsville. Now, if we had a large aluminium smelter built in Townsville, then because you'll end up servicing that load and not having to transport the electricity south several hundred kilometres, then you end up with lower losses as a consequence of adding a localised form of electricity demand. So there are some things that can change the MLF, which are a function of not just distance that the electricity has to travel, but also the nature of the resistance on the transmission line. But I'm not an expert on those issues. I am not an electricity network engineer, and will never pretend to have that sort of expertise. But you know, that's what drives the loss factors.
Thank you, Tristan. Clear explanation. And I think this MLF calculations trigger interest because it also relates, of course, in the end to the financial performance of the asset. And so the next question that was raised on this topic, just to add to it, is how can we forecast these MLF ratings into financial models? Do you have any thoughts on how asset owners or managers can use that to make their financial models adhere better with practice?
Yes, so there are a number of consultants out there that provide forecasts of future MLFs that would affect a particular project. We're not one of them, and obviously those forecasts are only as good as the inputs that go into them and whether they reflect likely reality. And one of the key things I think that has surprised or resulted in actual MLS being substantially worse than what some project developers anticipated is because a number of other projects nearby to them ultimately connected to the transmission line nearby that they hadn't anticipated, and that consequently led to much higher losses in that area than what the modelers had estimated for those projects.
Okay. Thank you. I think this the MLF calculations indeed is maybe not your main expertise, but it's really insightful to understand better, how it has an influence on the portfolios, and also to see it in a larger picture of what you showed today. So let's leave that topic for now and move back to O&M. To also have a question for Simon right now, as we're a bit short on time. We have a question here on the actual management of individual panels. So the question is it possible to monitor performance at a panel level and to do then also maintenance based upon such a more detailed analysis on panel level within different components of the panels? Do you have any thoughts on that or experience?
You can monitor to the string. To monitor to the panel would require, it could be done, but the cost would be prohibitive, and the impact, I mean, you're looking at potentially 500,000 panels on one site. To manage each one would be prohibitive in terms of actual costs. I would suggest things like thermal imaging, where you're using the drone, will actually identify hotspots on individual panels, which does give you a little bit of detail, enough to say that perhaps there's non-performing panels in that vision. But as a direct response, yes, it's possible, but no, it's cost prohibitive.
Yes, that's clear. I think this monitoring of panels performance also triggered quite some more questions, but what we'll do is with these questions that we cannot answer is we'll follow up with them and see if we can actually combine them into content pieces and use them further in the campaign to give some more insight on these topics. So if you don't see your question answered as an audience, we'll pick it up afterwards. Another question that was raised is what the need is in the Australian solar market for waterless solar panel cleaning solutions. And I think this relates both, Tristan, to your field of expertise with renewable energy and lower carbon emissions. I mean, it's of course better for the environment if we would have waterless cleaning solutions, and at the same time also Simon, of course, to O&M. So I would like to direct this question to both of you. What are your thoughts on this? What's the need for waterless solar panel cleaning solutions in the Australian market?
I'm going to delegate to Simon on this particular topic. He's got far more expertise than me.
Oh, thank you, Tristan. Yes, look, one of the issues, of course, is climate and water restrictions. When we're in drought, particularly in northern New South Wales and Queensland, we can do a dryless wash. The only problem with dryless wash is it's not necessarily as efficient in terms of cleaning as you will find with water-based washing. But in terms of if there's water restrictions in a community or an area, it may be the only option to do it. And certainly we do offer that as part of our services as well. Did that answer the question, Lisette, or you need more information?
No, thank you, Simon. That did answer this question. I am curious from Tristan's perspective, like just what your thoughts on this are, of course, but we have many more questions to answer, so we'll just continue with the next one for now. So a question to Simon related to the O&M space, then to follow up, is how you foresee the O&M landscape to change in the next years to come.
Well, as the market develops in Australia, I believe that there'll be there'll be a number of potential O&M providers, but they'll all have to have a fairly resource-intensive monitoring center and availability to service. So a human resource and data monitoring will be critical. So it's really the size of these farms in Australia. They're at the larger end in terms of solar farms. If you look at the UK and Europe, you don't see many farms beyond the 50 meg space. And yet in Australia, we're seeing hundreds of megawatts per farm. And, you know, it creates its own issues. So I guess the landscape will see improved technologies and probably only a small number of actual O&M providers in that space is my prediction.
Thank you. And what do you believe in terms of technology and use of data, artificial intelligence, how that would influence the space?
Yeah, I absolutely see that technology needs to improve in this space, and it is. I feel that in terms of data monitoring and analysis and then artificial intelligence, we'll be able to improve efficiencies. And that's the critical thing with any plant, is the ability to improve the efficiencies and whilst reducing the actual cost. You know, this is the upside of potential solar farms in Australia, is that there is room to improve. Whilst we have the other side with regulatory bodies causing all sorts of havoc and this transition from our current coal-fired, coal-based energy to renewables, there's a lot of uncertainty on that side. So, you know, the best course of action, I guess, is the long-term course of action, which is to continually improve. And I guess that's where you need your O&M provider to be in that space, looking at artificial intelligence, robotic cleaning systems, or vegetation management, you know, any number of things that you can improve the actual performance of the plant.
Thanks, Simon. I think that also nicely builds upon your story of how to build O&M excellence and the points to watch, and that it's all about the efficiencies in the end. So yes. I think this question nicely also sums up your part of the presentation. And as we have, we're already running a bit over time. Apologies to the audience for that. I would like to wrap up with one more general question to Tristan before rounding off today. And as promised, we'll look into the remaining questions and see how we can follow up with those. So Tristan, also having a look at all the developments that you mentioned, and of course there's a bit of policy uncertainty there because we have to wait the outcomes of the election. But what would be your general expectation of the developments in utility scale solar for 5 years to come, if we would have this webinar again?
Okay, so I would assume that Labor wins the next federal election and they manage to implement some kind of meaningful legal mechanism to drive down emissions, and we continue to see a robust market for utility scale solar, and we'd be talking about a market that, so I imagine in 5 years' time, we should continue to see ongoing solid construction activity, probably not as large as what we've seen recently, but you know, I think 1,000 megawatts to 2,000 megawatts per annum of construction commitments is not an unrealistic hope. If Labor were to win the next federal election and manage to obtain some kind of supportive majority in the Senate.
Well, I think this would provide a nice positive future outlook with the assumptions you give. It would also make maybe take away some of the worries that you presented in your presentation today. So curious to see what the outcome of this will be, and happy to have this webinar with you two again then in 5 years to see where we're standing both in the O&M landscape and the Australian market. So thanks a lot for your insights today. Really helpful to have this view from both your expertise on the Australian space. I will wrap up now shortly. Before we go with the upcoming events that we're hosting, where you can learn more about the topics that we presented today, and where you might likely also meet the speakers that were present today. So you can meet me actually already next week in North America at our Solar Asset Management North America conference, or in Sydney in 2 weeks from now, where Smart Energy Council, our partners, hosting their conference and exhibition on the 2nd and 3rd of April. There are still tickets available, so feel free to join us there. And otherwise, I hope to meet you in June at the conference in Australia, Solar Asset Management. If you have any questions on that, I am happy to answer them. So you can always contact me on my email address, which is here, or my phone number. Happy to hear your thoughts on the webinar and on the topics that we presented. And if you want to join, it's useful to check out the website already this week, because we still have our very early bird offer on until tomorrow. So if you're sure you want to join, make sure you join this week. That's it from our side. You can check out our website for more information on the conference, and we will share the webinar recordings and the slides with all of the attendees later today, hopefully. So I want to thank Simon and Tristan for their time and for their commitment today. Really interesting lessons that we learned, and happy to continue these conversations over the year and see where we're heading with the future of solar in Australia. Thanks a lot, and enjoy your evening there.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.